Rookie, sorry about that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the December 1st Regional Planning Committee meeting, our last of 2023. I am Dita Yamani. I'm acting as your vice chair. I'm in vice chair acting as the presiding officer for today's meeting. Before I move forward, I would like to ask our interpreter, Yelka Vargas, how to access interpretation. Ms. Yelka?
Yes, good afternoon. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, the world, and select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish audio in the background. Headsets are available for interpretation. If you are in the meeting room, please check out a headset from the receptionist in the lobby. Aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación globo terráqueo y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio, silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de reunión, favor de pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo. Please continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yelka. First, I will ask our clerk, Ms. Webb, to confirm that we have a quorum.
Thank you, Chair. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. I would like to start this meeting with the Kumeyaay land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the SANDAG community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. I will now call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item number 1, non-agenda public and member comments. Ms. Francesca, do we have any members of the public that wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We do have one member of the public who'd like to speak. The original draw. You can go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, as what we see, I don't know if you guys are aware of this COP or COP28, whatever. It's the United Nations Climate Change Conference that's happening right now. And they're very excited that Newsom, had Xi Jinping come and that we're engaging with China because they think that is going to push the needle forward, when in fact, if you look at China, they are doing anything but saving the planet. So it's a bit ridiculous that we sit here and engage with them and act like it's a good thing. But the fact that we are taking our direction from unelected globalist elites who don't have the best interest at heart for the people. They're talking about carbon credits. It's all to stop travel. Like at some point, it's going to be dictated that, we can only drive on certain days or at certain times, or, with more than one person, it's going to be illegal to drive alone. And all of these things. And it's sad because it's not about the planet. And you guys sit here and profess that we're trying to do things that will save the planet. And even the County of San Diego's climate action plan in it says that nothing that they do is going to help the region locally. And, you're doing it because you're getting, pressure from other entities and whatnot, because that's how you guys do stuff as well to get the people to comply, is that you either incentivize or de-incentivize. But, you know, what you're doing is, this is a huge scheme, and it's basically racketeering, and it's a bunch of fraud, because you guys are taking the people's money and you're lying to them, telling them that, you know, as long as we enslave them, that we're going to save the planet. And it doesn't matter if, you know, people suffer in the process. It doesn't matter if it costs billions of dollars to do it, and it costs way more to pretend to save it than to not. And you guys are all engaging in that. And, you know, all of this stuff is going to affect you. I mean, even at this COP28 climate change conference, they're talking about people not eating meat anymore. So, I mean, they're sitting here and deciding and dictating how people can live their lives in order to save the planet. I mean, at some point, I mean, we're already giving people sewer water, making them drink their own sewage. You know, and it's like, at some point, are we going to make them eat their own sewage too? I mean, you know, it's like they want us to eat bugs and all of this stuff. We're demonizing everything so that we can go down this route. And I just really would hope that you guys could look deep within your heart and soul and look at the fact that what the United Nations is doing, the fact that there's a pandemic preparedness treaty coming down the pipe, and that May of next year, we're not going to have any sovereignty to dictate what we want to do on a local level. And that's going to go across the board. Are you guys willing to let that happen? And you think you have control now, you won't then.
Thank you. Next, Senior Director of Regional Planning, Ms. Antoinette Meyer, will provide the agency update.
All right, thank you, Chair. I have just a few updates on agency activities since the last time the Regional Planning Committee met. So big one is last month, the Board of Directors approved an amendment to the program budget that allocated $643 million in federal, state, and local revenues, and that funding will advance 30 projects, actually more than 30 projects throughout the San Diego region over the next 5 years. We also awarded $12.3 million in housing acceleration grant funding to local jurisdictions. Many of your jurisdictions were recipients, so congratulations on that. The board is also making good progress on the recruitment of the next SANDAG CEO. So there were a couple of listening sessions that were held, a public survey to gather feedback, and all of that input will help the board in selecting the best candidate. And we anticipate that the board will announce their selection for an interim CEO at their meeting next week. And then the recruitment consultant, CPS HR, will begin accepting applications for the CEO position in January. I think you all know Hassan's last day is December 31st, the end of this month. We continue to do a lot of outreach and make progress on the 2025 regional plan. Last month at the board meeting, we shared with the board all of the public feedback that we've been hearing and receiving as we've been out in the communities, holding workshops and doing presentations and partnering with our social equity working group to reach communities and get their input. Next month, we're going to bring to the board an initial concept for the regional plan for their consideration, and it will take into consideration everything that we've been hearing from the public and from the board. And then speaking of outreach, our teams continue to make a lot of progress on two of our major infrastructure projects, the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry and the Losan Rail Realignment. The project teams have been out in the community, reaching stakeholders. So we've had multiple public workshops on the Losan Rail Realignment, and then SANDAG has participated in several successful visits with elected officials in Mexico to advance our binational infrastructure projects, and particularly the new Port of Entry. So we're grateful to our partners who have been collaborating with us on all of this important work that we do. And that is all of my report. Chair, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Meyer. Lastly, any comments from our committee members? Yes, Ms. Jones, thank you.
Thank you. I have a quick question. When we, at some point in time, regarding the CEO listening sessions, are we going to get any sense of attendance of those listening sessions, where they've been located, and then how many people are in attendance? Because I think that would just be helpful so we know what kind of feedback we're actually getting.
I will make that request. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Any other comments? Going once? Public comments, communications, member comments. Public comments under this agenda item will be limited to 5 public speakers. Members of the public shall have the opportunity to address the Regional Planning Committee on any issue within the jurisdiction of SANDAG that is not on this agenda. Public speakers are limited to 3 minutes or less per person. If the number of public comments under this agenda item exceeds 5, additional public comments will be taken at the end of the agenda. Subjects of previous agenda items may not again be addressed under this public comment. Thank you. Item number 2, consent agenda. Moving to the consent agenda, Ms. Francesca, do we have any public comments?
Yes, Chair, we do have one public comment on the consent agenda. The original draw, you can go ahead.
That was weird. At first, I thought you were going to retake public comment, and I thought, why are you doing that? Yes, so what you guys were talking about in your last meeting is sea level rise. And, I just want to, have you think about some things, like when you have a glass of water with ice in it, when that ice melts, does the water in the glass overflow? It doesn't, right? But yet we're sitting here saying that if ice melts, that we're going to have an incredible amount of sea level change and it's rising. And why do people then buy, property in those areas that are like multi-million-dollar properties? And people that actually profess that there is climate change and that their sea level rises. But then we also have people that believe that the earth spins 1,000 miles an hour. And that we're just sitting here and that there's gravity that, doesn't make you go smack dab into the face of the earth. It's like there's so many things that we're lied to about. And I just feel like nobody ever wants to acknowledge that. I mean, obviously, because you have a job to do and you have an agenda to push. But we deceive the people all the time when we sit here and we talk about sea level rising and like we have to do something about that. And that we have to mitigate things on the earth when it's a self-healing entity, creation, just like we are as human beings. But the more that we sit there and act like we're going to mitigate and make it better, we're destroying it every time we try and do that. We're not God. We're not the ultimate creator who, designed all these things. And we think that, we can come in here and make things better when in reality it doesn't. And everything that we do actually perpetuates the problem. But I mean, if you guys can't even look at a glass and know stuff like that happens, but then we listen to these people who are so intelligent or whatever telling us these things. I mean, again, like the earth doesn't spin 1,000 miles an hour. That makes no sense. And it's not a globe. But we have to tell people that in order to push certain things, right? And we use the people's money to do it. And we sit there and we deceive them about all of these things when we could be telling them the truth and actually making everybody's lives better. But the whole plan is to enslave the people. So we have to tell them these things, make them so fearful that they'll believe us. And it's never about the problem right there. It's always the solution that's offered. The solution is what you have to look at because that's the whole point of implementing it. And you'll use all of these issues and problems that you'll bring about just to do that. So I really would like to, have you look deep in your hearts and think about what you're doing. And you may think I'm crazy, but I'm being honest right now. And I think that the people deserve that, just like you would in any situation. And nobody likes being lied to, but we all have been, and it's time to course correct.
Thank you. Do we have any member comments or questions? Seeing none?
Move approval.
Oh,
approval.
thank you. I have a motion and I have a second. I have a motion from Ms. Jones and a second from Ms. Lyons. Voters will use the buttons for voting. All in favor? Let's vote. We voted?
What do we vote?
We vote this.
Oh, yes, is one.
Where will we vote? Oh, here. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Motion approved. Yes, ma'am?
Your vote didn't register.
Oh, it did not. See, I told you, rookie. There, did it register?
No.
I'm pressing it. I'm pressing it.
There we go.
Okay. It just wanted you to come over here. Thank you. Okay, that.
That motion passes unanimously with those
Thank
members
you.
present.
Moving on to reports, Ms. Kim Smith will present and ask RPC to recommend that the board approve the proposed Transnet Environmental Mitigation Program for FY24 to 2026 Work Plan and Budget Allocation. Ms. Smith?
Thank you, Chair, and whoops. There we go. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Kim Smith, and I'm a senior regional planner here at SANDAG, and I manage the Transnet Environmental Mitigation Program. Item number 3 on your agenda today is related to actions necessary to implement the EMP through fiscal years 24 through 26. So I always like to include this slide just as a quick reminder that the Transnet EMP provides funding to mitigate habitat impacts from regional and local transportation projects and funding for regional land management and biological monitoring. And it does this by acquiring and managing large tracts of lands with native habitats early in advance of those transportation projects that need mitigation. And this has allowed us to reduce overall cost, to accelerate the delivery of our transportation infrastructure projects, including streamlining our permitting, implementing our habitat conservation plans, and reducing the listing of species as threatened and endangered. And I'm happy to say to date, the EMP has helped acquire over 9,215 acres of land with our conservation partners. We are an award-winning program recognized nationally and by the state as a model for advanced mitigation. Even some of our adjacent counties have modeled our EMP, tried to model our EMP program, in addition to receiving several local planning awards for best management practices. So today's item specifically focuses on the Regional Habitat Conservation Fund. This is funding for regional land management and biological monitoring provisions of the EMP. Regional management and monitoring assures that the health and success of lands conserved as open space throughout our region are maintained. This is especially important because I'm not sure if any of you know, but San Diego County has the largest number of imperiled species of any county in the continental United States. Some of those are shown on the slide above. The EMP has contributed over $46.5 million to the region to help with management and monitoring of our open space. In addition, we've awarded a total of 136 land management grants since the inception of the program, totaling $18.8 million to local organizations, jurisdictions, and nonprofits. This funding helps our land managers deal with impacts from threats from off-road vehicles, homeless encampments, recreational use, illegal dumping, and invasive species. And it also helps implement projects such as habitat restoration. There's some dune restoration, for example, coastal cactus wren, placing signage and fencing to protect our open space areas, and also invasive species removal activities that help protect those biological resources. To implement the EMP, the SANDAG Board of Directors entered into an MOA with the Caltrans, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. The MOA was originally signed in 2008 and renewed in 2019, and it outlines the implementation strategy for the EMP. The MOA includes the allocation of $4 million per year to assist in funding the gaps in regional land management and biological monitoring. That maintains the regional preserve system. And it's really a safety net that protects our Transnet investments and helps eliminate the need for future listing of endangered species. Staff, with the assistance from the Regional Habitat Conservation Task Force, develops the work plan that identifies key tasks and milestones. And I just want to make a note that our task force chair, councilperson Chair Lyons, is here with us today. So per the MOA, annual funding for each year totaling $4 million is then reviewed and approved by the SANDAG board. And this year we're doing something a little bit different. Every year, we usually come to the committees and the board every year to get approval for our funding. This year, we're going to be coming to you with approval for allocation of funding for 3 years, totaling $12 million. This work is then implemented through consultant contracts and our land management grant program. So you may ask, what is the work plan? The work plan implements the goals and objectives of the Management Strategic Plan, which was developed and approved in 2017. The Management Strategic Plan, or MSP, is a technical document that provides recommendations for species. Priorities are based on species endangerment, habitat types, threats, and opportunities, and it develops regional objectives for efficient and effective use of our regional management and monitoring funding. Staff worked with the Regional Habitat Conservation Task Force to take these technical recommendations from the MSP and develop them into a work plan for fiscal years 24 through 26. The work plan, which is shown on attachment 1, defines those goals and milestones proposed for completion in the next 3 years. The work plan also tracks and monitors those implementation actions in order for us to measure success. Attachment 2, table 1 of your report, depicts the specific recommendations for the allocation of the fiscal year 24-26 funding for regional management and monitoring, split between the 4 strategic goals: promoting sensitive species, promoting native vegetation communities, improving wildlife movement, and promoting regional collaboration. Some examples of key milestones that SANDAG will be working on for each of the strategic goals include: first, for sensitive species. The photo on the bottom left shows the coastal California gnatcatcher, which is the flagstone species for the development of our regional conservation plans. SANDAG will work with the United States Geological Survey to complete regional surveys and a San Diego post-fire study that will inform the development of a connectivity assessment that spans from the border up to the Riverside and Orange County line for this small but mighty bird. For promoting native vegetation communities, you're probably wondering what cows standing in a field have to do with regional management monitoring. Well, SANDAG will continue to partner with UC Berkeley to evaluate the use of grazing as a large-scale management tool to reduce fire risk, help control invasive species, and restore habitats. We're going to be expanding our pilot grazing study to 2 new sites and finalizing a grazing management strategy based on those monitoring results. For wildlife movement, we're going to continue our work with UC Davis and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on testing predation deterrent devices with landowners and ramping up our education efforts in order to help landowners learn how to fence and better protect their livestock to prevent future depredation events from occurring with the mountain lion. And finally, regional collaboration. And this is the one I'm most excited about. With our regional partners, including a new collaboration this year with the San Diego Natural History Museum, SANDAG will host a workshop that will help in the development of a habitat conservation needs assessment. This needs assessment will identify gaps in conservation for the acquisition of open space and funding for regional management and monitoring. This will culminate with the final report and presentation at the annual State of Biodiversity Symposium in April of 2024. Pending the Board of Directors approval, the proposed management and monitoring fiscal year 24-26 work plan would then be implemented through 2026. Implementation would help eliminate future listing and promote the recovery of endangered species by providing land management and biological monitoring to proactively address the decline of endangered species and their habitats. Therefore, today, the Regional Planning Committee is asked to recommend that the Board of Directors approve the fiscal year proposed 2024-26 work plan and budget allocation for regional management and biological monitoring. That concludes my presentation today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Ms. Francesca, do we have any public comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The original draw, you can go ahead.
That's weird. I felt like at the last meeting you had some more things on there because you were whatever. Yeah, goats and cattle actually do well to clear land. But then does that fit into your whole climate action plan and their greenhouse gases that they emit from the methane? I mean, it's weird because everything is like contradictory, but that is a fantastic way to clear, but you also have to be aware of, other plants that you don't want them to eat. So if there's some kind of endangered plant there, you don't necessarily want them doing that because they will eat any and everything that is in sight. So that can actually lead to more problems. But if it's just clearing land that has nothing that you are, trying to preserve, then it's a really good idea. But, as far as this whole thing goes, preserving land, it's like if you look at all of the land that is out there, as far as how much land the people actually take up, it is so minimal. And we sit here and we're trying to buy up all the land. I mean, SANDAG's even going and looking at people's property taxes to buy up property to build, densely in those areas, which is going to put all of these people out because it's going to make their properties go up and it changes everything. And You're not even planning on adding enough affordable housing to mitigate that. And this is again part of the whole UN agenda is to buy up a bunch of land and get people into densely populated areas, because if you buy it all up where people want to possibly be, then you're pushing them into an area which is even a high fire zone, so it doesn't even make sense. But also you're talking about, which you didn't mention in this, and you did the last one, that you're collecting rare plant seeds, or you're doing genetic testing on different species. And so, I mean, I just don't know how that can make anything better. It's like they do genetic testing on human beings. I mean, what do you think these vaccines are? It's depopulation, but it's also gene therapy. So, I mean, none of that ever goes well. I don't know what the point of needing to do genetic testing and collecting of these seeds would be, because the people can't even go do that. It's like illegal if I wanted to go to get some seeds from a plant on the road or collect it. But then you guys can go sit here and do it, because then what are you going to make money off of it? It's like, what's the whole point of doing that? I mean, you act like you're going to preserve stuff, but there's always an ulterior motive to the things that are going on. And, we're sitting here worrying about this over, putting people in housing. It's like, this has to be done because, it takes a lot more. You could actually give homeless people a whole plot of land and have them build their own community. And most of them want to do that, but you can't even do that. People can't even buy their land and camp on it. I mean, everything is upside down. So whatever. I mean, I just think that, this is just another waste of the people's money and another way to get them where you need them to be, period.
Thank you. Do we have any member comments or questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you again, Kim. It was as good as it was this morning. You did mention, I don't recall if you said predation. When we talk about predation, were you talking about abatement or containment? And what is the extent? Because the mountain lions, when we introduce domesticated cattle, or really any animal that's not natural to the environment, is going to become a focus for the mountain lions and even the bobcats. So are we talking about fencing?
Yeah, so it has to do with, so one of the biggest, or besides road mortality, one of the biggest effects on the mountain lion is depredation. So it's where a landowner, if the mountain lion comes onto someone's property, then it's called a depredation permit that they pull, and they're allowed to take the mountain lion. The mountain lions are petitioned to be listed as a threatened species under the California Department of Fish and Wildlife by the state. And so it's working with landowners. We're doing testing where they're trying out different alarms, different, if a landowner had like speakers where they had, voices of folks, does that deter a mountain lion from coming back? And then educating them and potentially in the future, maybe some incentives to help people, if they've got chickens or whatever, to properly fence up their livestock. So that is what, when we talk about depredation.
Are we limiting it to the lions? There are black bears out in the back part of the county. Are we also, is it any predatory animal then?
Right now, our study just focuses on the mountain lion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other member comment?
I just
Yes.
have one quick question. Thank you. On enforcement, it's showing $0 in 24, 25, and 26 for enforcement. Just curious as to why we wouldn't have any dollars for that. And I read the explanation, but it still kind of doesn't seem.
So we actually do have funding that we allocated in past years. So we've got, I believe it's 600,000 sitting in a pot.
Okay,
So we're
all
not
right.
allocating any money in the future. And then we're working on coming up with an enforcement strategy, kind of to set our goals out on how we want to divvy up that money. In the past, we did do some pilot studies or pilot projects with some of our jurisdictions, Carlsbad and the city, to do different programs. There was like a ranger program. There was a program with the City of San Diego Police Force to help with enforcement in some of the Canyonlands. And so I think in order to understand how we can better use that funding, we're coming up with the enforcement strategy, and that's what we're going to be working on the next year. So that's we do have funding. We just aren't allocating in the next 3 years.
Okay, and I don't know if I actually missed that somewhere, but it would be helpful to say that we, to have that somewhere located, and if I missed it, my apologies, that there is $600,000 in it. And a lot of cities actually have those ranger programs. I know we have a pretty robust one as well. And I think that is a good way to utilize even a small amount of funds just to make sure that we're, paying attention to that. But thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Great comment. Thank you. Ms. Lyons?
Really good comments. As Kim Smith indicated, I'm the chair of the Regional Habitat Task Force. I wanted to point to something that I think is really important, and that is that the funding for this was authorized in 2008 at 4 million, and we've had 4 million per year since then. And you could do a lot more with 4 million a year back in 2008 than you can now. So I think that SANDAG and the advocates on the task force are trying to be as smart and as effective and use the available money as constructively as possible. But there's been a diminished amount of work that can be done under this program. I just wanted to shine a light on that in maybe a slightly different manner. And if it's appropriate for me to move approval as the chair of the task force, I'm not sure if that's appropriate, but I will move approval of this item.
Before we do that, Ms. Lyons, I wanted to note that there was an administrative error on the agenda referencing Transportation Committee as a body taking action. I'd like to ask our council to speak to the issue before we vote. Council?
Thank you, Chair. Because the meeting agenda is clearly titled Regional Planning Committee and the substance of today's action remains unchanged, it's my opinion that the agenda is in substantial compliance with the Brown Act, and RPC may vote on this item.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Ms. Lyons, that is a motion from you.
Yes, it is.
May I ask for second,
I'll
please?
second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Ms. Francesca, do we have to vote? Let's vote. Recommend. So we are voting on the staff, a recommend, it's gone from item number 3. Let's recommend. I'm voting there.
That item
Okay.
passes unanimously with those members present.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is item number 4. Ms. Jenny Russo will provide us an overview of SANDAG's grant programs and evaluation process. Ms. Russo, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here today to present an overview of the process that we use in our competitive grant programs. My presentation and report also includes some of the best practices and other public agencies use that can use to be implementing changes in our process moving forward. So first, I want to start with an overview. SANDAG has 8 competitive grant programs. The Transit Ordinance created 4 of those, which are shown on this slide. And the Board of Directors has broad discretion in shaping these programs and how the funds are distributed. The first one, the Active Transportation Grant Program, or ATGP, is for our local jurisdictions, and it funds planning and capital projects that increase walking, biking, and transit use. The program's awarded over $29 million to 88 projects. Next is our EMP Land Management Grant Program following Kim's presentation, and it provides our land managers with funding for habitat restoration, habitat preservation, and eradication of non-native plant species. More than $16 million has been awarded to 114 projects. Next is the Senior Mini Grant Program, or SMG, that funds nonprofits and local jurisdiction projects that provide transportation services for older adults. SANDAG has awarded over $24 million through this program to 93 projects. And then last is the Smart Growth Incentive Program, or SGIP, which provides funding to our local jurisdictions for planning and capital projects that support smart growth and transit-oriented development. The program has awarded about $60 million to 72 projects. The remaining 4 grant programs are funded by other agencies and are shown on this slide. These programs are required to follow the requirements that are set forth by the funder, and the award process is subject to their approval. The Access for All program, or AFA, funds on-demand wheelchair accessible service for individuals with disabilities. The AFA is our newest grant program, and it's funded by the California Public Utilities Commission. Last year, the board awarded $2.5 million to one project in the first fiscal year of the program, and we're getting ready to release our next cycle here in the next month or so. Next is the Active Transportation Grant Program, or ATP. This is managed by the California Transportation Commission and Caltrans. However, SANDAG is required to conduct the competitive selection process for the funding that's allocated to our region. The regional ATP has awarded over $138 million in state and federal funding to 39 projects since 2017. The Housing Acceleration Program, or HAP, is another new grant program and is funded by HCD. HAP provides grants to local jurisdictions to fund planning and capital projects that accelerate housing production, and we've awarded $14.2 million to 22 projects with our most recent awards about a month ago. And then one of our oldest programs, the Section 5310 program, is funded by the Federal Transit Administration, and it funds projects that provide transportation service for older adults and individuals with disabilities. We've awarded over $40 million in federal funding through the program to 180 projects. So we use a process called a call for projects to distribute our grant funding. The overall process and the key steps are shown on this slide. The Regional Planning Committee and Board of Directors are involved in two main steps of the process. First is the call for projects development, which is step one, where the program goals, objectives, eligibility, and evaluation criteria are discussed and approved. The call for projects is then issued, applications are received and evaluated against the criteria approved by the board, and the funding recommendations developed by grant staff are consistent with the call for projects. Finally, the RPC and the board are asked to approve the results of the process, which is step 5, and to allow projects to be implemented, which is step 6. During the project implementation, grant staff provide RPC with the status of grant projects during our quarterly updates, and RPC is also asked to consider amendments to grant projects if they're needed. So when considering the funding recommendations for the most recent STGP and ATP programs, the Transportation Committee had several questions for our staff regarding the process, which are listed on the first page of your agenda item. The questions comprise 3 main topic areas, which are shown on this slide. So evaluator training, evaluator bias and consistency, and project ranking and funding. Today's item is to provide you with the results of research conducted in these areas and adjustments that are being made to our process to address these topics. To answer the questions raised by TC, the grants team researched numerous local, state, and federal agencies with discretionary grant programs, which are shown on this slide. The research revealed variances in how grant programs are conducted, and many grant programs don't describe their entire process either publicly or comprehensively. So our discussion memo, which is attachment 1, describes the process elements, what the research identified, and whether SANDAG's current practice is different and could be improved. And I'll go into further details next. So my research found multiple areas where our grant process could be improved, which are summarized on this slide. Some of the key findings that I wanted to highlight. So first is many of the sample organizations require all of the evaluators to attend a mandatory training session that the agency is offering. The training session ensures that all evaluators are provided with the same information, they have an opportunity to ask questions, and they fully understand the work that they'll be conducting. This training enhances the process and provides a strong foundation for those evaluators. Next is the level of detail in the agency scoring rubric varied from general categories with broad point ranges to detailed criteria with definitions and scoring strategies to distribute points. Agencies that receive many applications use these really detailed scoring rubrics that thoroughly describe the criteria. They provide these really high quality definitions, and they include a scoring strategy that shows you exactly how points are awarded. The detailed rubric can reduce the amount of time that an evaluator spends on scoring an application. It helps ensure consistency and objectivity in the scoring process, and it helps provide a framework for substantive feedback back to the applicant. And then lastly is that evaluator meetings are held to encourage consensus among the evaluators. The most surprising finding of my research was that none of the agencies use a ranking process to establish the final application order. This highlights the importance of having that detailed scoring rubric and ensures that all evaluators are trained to ensure that consistency across the score. Most agencies also fully fund applications in descending order until that funding is exhausted, and only a few of the federal agencies use a secondary application process to more closely review projects for funding consideration. And lastly, geographic distribution is accomplished through two main methods. It's either a geographic limitation or a set aside, and these vary dramatically from program to program. So this report and presentation were provided to the Transportation Committee in July. And since that time, we've been working on implementing changes to our call for projects process that were discussed on these slides. Today's item is for discussion. I'm looking for feedback from all of you that I can utilize to develop future calls for projects and make changes for our upcoming cycles. So the timing for the next call for projects under each of the programs is shown on this slide. The time frame shown is when we anticipate returning to either the Transportation Committee or the Regional Planning Committee for input on the evaluation criteria, which is that first step in the process that I mentioned earlier. You'll notice that the anticipated timing for the next cycle of the Housing Acceleration Program, or HAP, is unknown. This is because the program is funded through a grant from HCD, and as of right now, we're not sure whether they're going to offer another grant to be able to further sustain this program, but it's something that we're looking at and trying to determine. So this concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, and I'll give it back to the chair.
Thank you, Chair. We have one public comment, the original draw. You can go ahead.
It seems that grants are what determine what gets done, because it's you have to comply with the local, state, and federal government if you're going to try and get any money for anything. And so if you want to do something that's outside the constructs of this agenda, you're never going to have money. And so it's a good excuse for you guys to be able to be like, well, you know, there's no money for this or that, right? Because it's not being offered. But that's why you'll jump on the opportunity to get these grants to push whatever it is, because even with this like access for all, and I mentioned it before at some of the other committees or whatever, when you're putting people who are disabled into a lithium bomb, I mean, you're incentivizing them, like you'll give them the money, right? But it's like, in order to get this, you have to get this type of vehicle or this type of fleet in order to use. But you're not even getting into the dangers that leaves. And, you know, of course, we want people to get around. But when we use the people's money to get them out of the way of living that they are, like getting us out of our cars and onto biking and walking and using public transit. You know, of course, if you're disabled, you want to get around. And I was in a wheelchair for 8 years because I was paralyzed. And, you know, it's terrifying to me to think that you guys are incentivizing putting them in some kind of lithium bomb that potentially they could blow up in, and or not be able to get out of the vehicle if some kind of crash happened, because these vehicles, depending on where the ramp is, it makes a difference. But what is just, you know, kind of a bit, and also like the housing, man, I had something else I was going to say and I just lost my train of thought, but, and you guys are probably like, thank God, you know, just when we are, I don't even know at this point, shoot, but I'm going to still take my time because just in case, that, you know, if the things that we were going to do, we're going to be helping people, the money would be available to spend on other things that aren't just in order to put us into this, you know, like a 15-minute city, basically. Dang it. I can't remember what I was going to say. Crap. That's all right. I guess I'll stop because I don't remember.
Thank you. Any comments from our members? Yes, Ms. Jones?
Thank you. Okay, so reading through this and looking at the scoring rubric, some of the things I agree with, some of them I think are a little bit ambiguous because, for instance, when we're talking about, well, even just the VMT reduction, you know, land that's available within communities is the land that's actually available. And so sometimes it's not near, you know, it's not near public transit, but then I did notice in here that it says specifically walking and bicycling, the degree to which a project supports transportation choices that would reduce vehicle miles traveled, specifically walking and bicycling. So is that to get to work or is that as something else? Because most people that live in San Marcos, for instance, you know, they don't actually work inside the city. A lot of them work outside of the city. There's no way that walking or bicycling is probably viable for them. And so I think some of the cities, due to geographic area, that we would like this is, and it scores pretty high. It's like 30 points available. I'm not sure if I'm actually comfortable with that for that reason. And then when you're talking about board policy number 33, which is 25% of the total points, 50 points possible. Just kind of reading through some of those things. Oh, shoot, now where's that? Okay, here we go. It talks a little bit about housing equity, which I would agree that most cities probably are already following that. But then we're talking also about rent stabilization policies. I would actually say that probably in some cases, rent stabilization may not work and it might be an actual deterrent for a project, not necessarily something that is going to promote a project and its viability. And then rezoning and other policies that result in a net gain of low to moderate income housing. You know, cities like San Marcos, we have 7% of our total housing stock is deed restricted affordable. So we've actually done better than most in that particular way. But then when you're talking about mitigating development's impacts on and from environmentally sensitive and hazardous areas, like my city, most of it is actually we have a lot of open space, but a lot of that open space is actually habitat space that can't be built on. So I don't know if that actually makes sense either. And then also zone changes and other policies that increase low and moderate income housing and affordability. When I think about that, just saying that it's going to be affordable or low income doesn't necessarily happen because that is truly market driven. And so some of these things, I look at them and I go, yes, they sound idealistic and they would be great if they actually worked. But I don't feel like in some cases, and this is just me giving my experience, this is my 17th year in office, and San Marcos is one of the fastest growing cities in the county. We actually have done a lot of these things right, but I think some of these things where we're giving a lot of points associated with them, that they aren't really what's happening on the ground and things that are actually a viable solution. There was one other thing, and I can't locate it right now, and I'm trying to find it. There was something about 150%. Oh, here it is. The favorable zoning and land use, a housing element plan for zoned capacity of over 150% of RENA. When you think about that in itself, sounds great, sounds idealistic. However, there are a lot of cities that actually are not allowing these projects to actually be built. So they have essentially figured out a way around actually building, but they say they want to build, but they're not even meeting any of their goals. And so I just want to make sure that when we are bringing forward things to the board of directors, and I'm a member of that as well, but when we're bringing forward these things that yes, they sound good and they have a lot of numbers attached to them, that they're actually things that can truly be implemented and they're not just for paper, if that makes sense. So I just want us to be very mindful of that. And I just want you to not know that I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying that there are a lot of things that happen in real life when you're actually approving development and trying to get it built. And, you know, as we all know, the cities don't actually build the housing, it's development partners. So that we're not pigeonholing ourselves into a situation that it doesn't even actually work, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Any, yes, Mr. Castillo?
Yeah, I was gonna say that I really appreciate the goals, and especially the effort to promote communities that are walkable and comfortable. And I was going to suggest that cities that have met their RENA targets get more money for community development. But I'll humor. I'm from Lemon Grove, which is the only city that met the RENA targets. But all seriousness aside, I think I think when we talk about walkability, in many cases it's walking to transit, and like I do, most of my walking is walking to the trolley station, and most of the cities have trolley, and I used to teach at Palomar College, so I know there's a trolley that goes through San Marcos. And I think that's where I think that's where a lot of the walkability is going to be. And I think that when we talk about walkability, we mean, kids walking to school. We think people walking within their communities and people walking to transit. And I think that one of the dangers that those of us that are more moderate to low income communities that we're very aware of is that if you attract a lot of housing and a lot of it's affordable, there's advantages, because there's advantages to density, and you can draw grants, and that does make a huge difference in getting things built and making housing available for people. But it also puts strains on communities, and I think that we need to combat what's often called the fiscalization of land use. If you'll forgive a term that sounds like a planning professor came up with it, but I think we want to go because that's the tendency for the communities to try to attract fewer people and more high-end people, because that supports their sales tax and it doesn't put as much burden on services. Whereas communities like Lemon Grove, we attract people of all income levels, and we're, what's known as a moderate to low income kind of city. And it puts a huge strain on services in proportion to the tax revenue that we're collecting. But ways to combat that are programs to encourage economic development, to draw people into the city. National City's done particularly well at that. And programs to make the communities more walkable, more vibrant, to encourage people that do have money to stay in the communities and move into the communities, and to encourage more people from the outside to come to the community. So what I'm saying is that I think part of our priority should be to try to combat the fiscalization of land use and reward the communities that are in fact drawing a lot of moderate to low income people. And it's true, we're very proud of our housing, especially Shatronica and Celsius, which are right near the Lemon Grove Trolley Depot. It's true that we didn't build those places, but the incentives make a huge difference. I don't think we could have built Shatronica. I don't think Shatronica would have been built, put it that way, if it wasn't for government incentives. So I definitely want to continue those things. At the same time, I have to say, in our own city, we love affordable housing, we also are very aware that we really need all types of housing. So, encouraging economic diversity is a positive thing as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Musgrove?
Yeah, not to sound like a lecture, but if we went away from the static numbers based on the factors that have been established for RENA and maybe set it to a percentage of housing stock, I think we would come in first. Is that correct, Mayor? 7% of our housing stock is deed restricted / affordable. If we could look either from a point in time moving forward, articulating that of the homes that you anticipate based on your general plan, a certain percentage must meet this criteria. That would give our developers a target. A lot of developers pay in lieu fees, which ultimately helps those developers that want to build affordable housing, excuse me. But it also gets them out because it's cheaper to do that than it is to estimate today what these homes will sell for in 2.5 years when they come on the market, when that is an unknown. So that is the dilemma that they face. So Councilmember Gassel just mentioned something about Palomar College and when the Sprinter goes through there. There are 2 large multifamily housing projects literally across the street, but because of the overregulation we have in this state and the developers needing to feed everybody, because it's not just the developer that walks off with the money, it's our local shops, our local vendors, people that come in from out of town to work. They have to be able to sell them where everyone eats. And so affordability is an ever-changing target. And so how do you plan out from the time that you approve plans till you hand over keys, what will be affordable? Because we hear all the time from our developers, this is our target price range today, based on what they see around and what they can estimate. And in 2 or 2.5 years, we never hit that target. And quite honestly, I would rather see it be a little bit more expensive. It means our economies are growing. If that target now becomes less than what they estimated, then they're walking away from projects. We do not want half-finished projects, holes in the ground, units cannot sell, REOs from the banks trying to dump them on somebody. Then we end up with government housing, and that's not the answer either. We don't do anything well as a government. It has to be a market society. So I would love to see the RENA shift from hard numbers based on extrapolations and formulas to a percentage of, and these are your targets. And like the council member said, if you get to those targets, there will be a benefit for you. So then that really instills that partnership with the communities and their developers to get to those targets. Cut some of the red tape so it kills the time element involved in these projects so they can more reasonably be assured with their investors, lenders, and ultimately with the sales to get to those target numbers and actually have affordable housing. I think we do this completely backward, and it just is not working, and it's not going to work if we continue down this path. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioners' comments?
If I may, just 2 points
Yes.
of
Yes, Ms. Antoinette.
clarification.
Yes.
So today was really about the process. Specific evaluation criteria for each of the grant programs will always come through this group, like for Smart Growth Incentive, for example, and to the board for approval. You'll have opportunities to weigh in on the grant program criteria as we release those grants. The second thing is some of the grant programs aren't SANDAG funding, so they're not Transnet. They come from the state, and that evaluation criteria gets passed down to SANDAG. We don't have as much control over the evaluation criteria for that funding. So just 2 things I wanted to point out about the SANDAG grants. Some of them are ours, some of them are Transnet funded, others are passed through money that we get from state agencies, and we have very little control over the evaluation criteria. But regardless, all of the criteria will come to you.
Thank you.
Sorry, could I ask a follow-up on that? So as far as all of this criteria, it goes for all grants. It's not specific to Transnet or any or federal grant, or is that what you're saying? Sorry.
No, what I'm saying is this is really about the process that the grant process, the specific evaluation criteria for each of the specific funding programs like Smart Growth or HAP or Active Transportation. That evaluation criteria will come through this group for review and approval and recommendation to the board, and the board will ultimately have to approve that criteria.
Okay, so the action, well, I mean, I guess it doesn't even really ask for an actual action. It's saying evaluation process, but the evaluation doesn't necessarily then mean the exact criteria.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's where I was a little confused. So I just wanted clarification on that.
Yep,
Okay.
this is the process, but not the exact criteria. The exact
Gotcha.
criteria will be brought to you at a later point. So we'll release
Thanks.
smart growth probably sometime early next year, and we'll bring the criteria through this group.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, the attachment in the report, the HAP, was to give you an idea of like, well, what's in there so you can see the entire packet and what's there. So that's what would come back to you if I can back this up, or maybe the folks can. The timing, you'll see this will come back to you, and then it gives you a tangible place to dig into criteria like we were looking at. If you want to go back one, there you go. So this timing, this is about when you would see. It doesn't have a month because we kind of don't exactly know the time frame, but this would be your opportunity to get specific on criteria or something in each of those programs. All right, one more clarification on that.
So you're saying, for instance, in spring of 24, the STGP would come in front of us. And is that when we would weigh in on the criteria?
Exactly.
Okay, all right. I felt like, sorry, I misunderstood. I thought the criteria was coming to us. We were okaying it, and then we would go out for call for projects. That's my mistake. And so thanks for clarifying.
No problem.
That's what I
Thanks.
thought you were taking away from
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that's what I was kind of going,
to
wait a
clarify.
minute.
You're not, yes.
Yeah. Okay, all right, great, thanks.
And we'll let you know too, what's flexible and what we can change when we bring you the evaluation criteria, and what's sort of set in stone by the funding agency at the state level.
Any other comments from commissioners? Thank you, Ms. Russo, for your staff and your team. Thank you I'm confident that you have done your due diligence in making sure that best practices will be acknowledged or will be considered. But I would also like to make sure that comments from this commission will be considered when presented to the board. Thank you. Next, on to item number 5, Ms. Cindy Burke and Ms. Antoinette Meyer will present details of the recently completed telework study.
Well, you're not going to hear too much from me. This is really Dr. Burke's item, but the telework survey is a collaboration between the planning department and our data science team. You've heard us say a lot that the development of the regional plan is a data-driven planning process, and we really kick off regional plans by doing a significant amount of data collection and analysis. So lots of surveys that we do, and this is one of those surveys, relatively new one. We started it back in 2021 as we were coming out of the pandemic and employers were considering bringing their employees back to the office. We wanted to understand how remote work would continue in the future, and specifically how it would affect travel behavior and transportation in the region. So we did that survey early 2021, and then we just repeated it in 2023. So Dr. Burke is going to share the results. One other thing I wanted to say is that the California Air Resources Board, which is a state agency that regulates the regional plan sustainable community strategy, asked us to have more localized data on telework to really validate any of the assumptions that we're making in the plan about VMT reduction and GHG reduction that might be associated with telework. So we're satisfying that requirement as well with this. So Dr. Burke, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As Antoinette mentioned, we really are trying to provide data to the planners to do the best planning that we can for the region as we do the 2025 plan. And our last plan in 2021 had a base year of 2016, and our next base year will be 2022. So we obviously know that a lot has changed over that period of time. When we did the first survey in 2021, we asked both employers and employees about telework pre-pandemic and in 2021 when we were still socially distancing and a lot of people were still 100% working remotely. People were still doing homeschooling in many cases. And in our 2023 survey, we collaborated with True North Research again, who had done the first survey. I want to make it really clear that This is not a longitudinal sample, so we talked to different businesses. Possibly somebody could have been in the same sample both times, or somebody could have been an employee in both surveys, but it was not intentional to track people over the same time period. We use the best survey methodology we could, but there is always an error, a level of error with any time that you're surveying from a sample and trying to generalize back out to a population. So we have a lot of data in the full report, which is online, in terms of the percentage points that one should consider around the range of the data that we are seeing. But we were able to talk to 627 businesses, which represented the size of different organizations, the area of the region, the type of industry, as well as 1,100 employees. And that outreach was done with both email and phone outreach. So what have we seen? When we did the first survey, businesses were not as positive as they were this time. We found that 46% of those businesses surveyed this time were more positive about the pandemic. And obviously there was confounds here going on when we were all 100% working from home, again, having school-age children at home, potentially the emotional trauma that was all going on with the pandemic. So it really wasn't fair to say that that was what telework could look like when people were mandated to do it. But we also found that now businesses were much more likely to say that they are aware and acknowledging employee morale, having the flexibility and work-life balance, lower business expenses. We found that almost half said that they had reduced square footage or terminated leases, which I was talking with Antoinette about this before the meeting, and what could that mean potentially as we're trying to meet housing needs, and there could be office space that could be repurposed possibly with zoning laws. And that people are able to hire and retain good employees, but there's still some challenges that businesses are feeling about how do you ensure communication, collaboration. I know at SANDAG we saw junior staff, we may not have the relationships. I know I felt socially awkward when I went back to a meeting live in person and had to make small talk because everything had just been business when we were online. So still some issues there, but much different than it used to be. What this slide shows is data from our first survey in the first two bars and the line, and then the last one is our most recent survey. And the green bars show what % of businesses overall in the region offer remote work, and we define that as at least one employee at least 1 day a week that they can work remote. And you can see that prior to the pandemic, only about 1 in 4, 27% of businesses said they offered remote at all. That went up to 47% during the pandemic, and it's even higher now, 57%. At the same time, the yellow line shows the % of employees that say that, businesses that say that they are offering remote work to at least one employee. Prior to the pandemic, of those who did offer it, it was 64%. Now it's up to 72%. But we see an interesting difference with size of the business, which is important to consider. About 2/3 of businesses in the San Diego region are actually smaller than 5 employees. And you can see that smaller businesses only offer remote work, 58% of them, compared to 73% of those larger businesses. But when a small business can offer remote work, they are able to offer it to a greater percentage of their employees. So I know at SANDAG, you think there might be planners or modelers who are able to work at home, but individuals who work down on our toll facilities or who aren't necessary to be on site aren't here. But if you have a small business that's just doing one task, everybody could work remote. The data on the right from another question follows up with that you could see that only 14% of small businesses said they offered remote work to fewer employees now than they did during the pandemic. 30% said they offered it to more, but 61% of those larger companies said that they've actually are offering remote work less. Some other data that as we're looking at the planning and how this affects how we get around the region and what it all looks like, we did see that businesses have allowed employees to move away during the pandemic. They've hired some employees to who live outside the region. Especially larger businesses are saying that if their remote work policy was not flexible enough, that did create challenges because staff had gotten used to and liked having that remote work-life balance. But we've also found that only 60% of businesses say that none of their employees are 100% remote. When you look at just those businesses who say they do remote at all, it's 83% say none do remote work at all. And we also saw that only 12% of employees say that they're working 100% remote. So again, it's that hybrid is much more common. Of those individuals who are working remote, on average, it's about 3 days per week, and they're more likely to say that there's flexibility. So again, it's interesting to think about when you think about the morning commute, the afternoon commute, what are our traffic volumes like around the region, that there are more people traveling during the commute in the evening that necessarily than in the morning. And then what does that flexibility mean? That how do you have capacity that will meet when we have the hotspot needs, but also have flexibility knowing there are fewer people on the roads going to work at the same time? This data shows now the employees that we talk to, and you can see a similar pattern, interestingly, with the, again, going from 100% remote that was required to having hybrid and flexibility. The percent of employees that said that they were able to telework went up from 25% to 54%. And then now we're finding that 39% say that they work remote. We know from other analysis from our economic staff that about 1 in 3 jobs are able to be worked remotely. And then the average number of days worked, I said 3 is of those who work remote, but overall, when you consider all employees in the region, the average is about 1. Some other interesting statistics by the industry of the employee. Employees who are most likely to work remote prior to the pandemic in finance, real estate, professional services. The first percentage you can see there is what percent said that they worked remote prior to the pandemic, then during the pandemic, and after the pandemic in 2023. And so you can see that those are still almost 2/3 or greater are most likely to be working remote. Those who had the lowest remote work prior to the pandemic are now still more likely to work remote than they were prior to, but still much smaller percentages, 1/3 of administrative staff, 1/3 of public administration. And then those employees in the sectors that had the greatest change in the ability were transportation, education. We know teachers who had to pivot and teach from their own home went up to remote work. For education field went up to 76, but it's back down to 26%. We did some analysis by telework by city, and on average, it looks like that about 30% of jobs, this is based on where the businesses are able to be worked remotely. Coronado had the highest percentage at 40%, and Lemon Grove had the lowest percent at 22% of the jobs. And we're also doing analysis. Many of you may remember our Employment Centers 1.0, which we did as part of our analysis for the 2021 regional plan, and we're updating that with new data for Employment Centers 2.0. But we, again, tried to look at some of the ability to work remotely. It's interesting, Sorrento Valley and Kearney Mesa are our biggest employment centers, along with downtown, and the percent of jobs in Sorrento Valley that can be worked remotely is much higher than in Kearney Mesa, where there's a lot of still county workers, for example, or medical. And so we'll be considering this and sharing more data with you in the future. Talking about disparities, though, it's important to consider that not everyone has the ability to work remotely, depending on what type of job they have. And this shows on the left column those who were least likely, the employee surveyed, to say that they had the ability to work remotely versus those who were most likely, younger or less likely than older. Household income was a significant predictor. Race, ethnicity, as well as where they said that they resided. Those employees in South County that we talked to were less likely to say that they could work remotely than those who worked in North County West. And then some other stats, you know, we all saw what the effect was on the highway of when everybody was 100% remote. But now, as we don't have the social distancing and people are out and about, we are finding that 4 in 5 employees that we talk to say that when the days that they telework, that they're making midday trips. And maybe those midday trips would have been ones on the weekend, so they're just moving on when they're doing it. But it also could be the case that the trips that they would have done on the way to work, dropping a kid off at school, they're still doing that in addition. And the average work trip is about 20 miles round trip in the region, and that's about 1 in 5 trips we make. The average number of miles that employees who are taking midday trips is about 9. So still about half of that. So still contributing to the VMT. And then as we look at carpool programs or working with employers trying to make carpooling easier or offering options to get to work on days, employees who do telework, who are the days that go into the office, we found that employees who telework are more likely to drive to work solo than those who don't telecommute. So again, interesting to think about what are the implications and how can we encourage and offer alternatives. And then this last finding we asked in 2023 about online shopping and then also driving for the errands. And we found that individuals are saying that compared to during the pandemic, they're even shopping more online, but they're still going out to do errands. And so I don't know about you, but yesterday I ordered something from Amazon and then I also ran to Target to get something else. So it's interesting as we think about our regional planning and what we're doing with commercial vehicles and how that contributes to our vehicle miles traveled. How can we all work together to look at what are we going to do to meet our greenhouse gas emissions and offer people options, obviously, but also consider what are the effective policies and programs. So I know that we're running late, so there's a couple more presenters, but just again, some of the takeaways. Remote work is more common than it used to be, but it's not like it used to be. It's hybrid, and we have people who are still going into work at least a couple of days a week on average. There's flexibility on that, so we can't say that there's just certain days of the week that we aren't going to need to have the options. The larger businesses, which are often in the employment centers, are less likely to offer remote to everybody. So again, considering the hotspots that we have around the region, but not everybody can remote work. So how do we make sure that people have options? And then again, how do we just consider all the vehicle miles traveled for a variety of reasons? And again, offer people options. So I'll turn it back to Antoinette to close it up, and then happy to answer any questions.
I don't think you need anything else from me. Good job, Cindy. I'll hand it back to the chair for questions.
See, rookie. Thank you, Dr. Berg. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Antoinette. Francesca, any public comments?
Thank you, Chair. We do have one public comment. The original draw, you can go ahead.
Yes, you guys in your data, you love the data. And I don't know, I mean, it's like you guys were stoked when this pandemic of COVID came along because then you thought that would mitigate everything. And then now you're bummed that, you got to figure out how to encourage, and offer alternatives. But it's interesting because, there is, a white lung disease going around in China, and it's actually hit the US. So, I mean, we're in good line to have another pandemic so that you guys can get this going again and, get people off the road. But I wonder why you don't consider like Amazon or, anything that's driving, like even transit, public transit is using VMTs. It's like, we have to stop VMT, but we're still offering VMT through public transit. And I don't understand why you think that asking 627 businesses and 1,100 employees out of 3.38 million people is a good amount of data to really see like how this works and whatnot. But when you're talking about encouraging and offering alternatives, the only thing I can see with this when you're collecting data on this type of stuff and saying like, oh my gosh, their commuting is still happening and people still have to go and make trips outside, that you're going to do something to try and encourage and incentivize people to work remotely. And, talk about living where you work, you're literally going to be living where you work. And that's what you guys want. But this has nothing to do with making anybody's lives easier. It's about enslaving the people. And, you're using, that's the whole point, is like having a problem to get to the solution. You need people off the roads and into their 15-minute city. And so if you can use a pandemic or whatever it is, right, it's great because it like really helps you guys move the needle forward pretty quickly. And, but it's interesting to hear you talk like that because people are still always going to need to make trips. You guys are always we're always going to need stuff. And to think that people just want to stay in their homes and walk like 5 minutes somewhere and think that that's like such a great life. I mean, it's like taking a goldfish out of the ocean and putting it in a fish tank or whatever, not a goldfish, any kind of fish. And, you know, acting like that's going to be a better life because it's smaller. You don't have to worry about like, you know, predators, you know, you kind of use the fear tactic of like, you know, all these things. But in reality, you're just like encaging and enslaving and, you know, minimizing the amounts of freedoms that people have. And so it's just sad to hear you guys talk like this and not see what you're doing is actually doing that, and how you're talking about the pandemic and how you thought that was going to be the solution. That's really disturbing to hear, because many people died and they're still dying from the effects of that whole pandemic.
That concludes the public comment.
Thank you. Commissioners, any member comments? Yes, Ms. Jones?
I'm just hoping that when we're collecting the data, we have a couple of maybe further follow-up questions for the folks. One of them would be when we're talking about online shopping and driving for errands, I tend to try to actually run my errands when I'm driving somewhere. So for instance, I have actually a council member, or my deputy mayor, Sharon Jenkins, was going to, she called me up. I'm not sure why she's not here, by the way. But when people are saying, okay, hey, you know, how about, would you like to, you know, go to the meeting together? And I was like, oh, well, this is how I actually do this. If I'm going to San Diego for a meeting, I have a gazillion errands that I'm running that I don't have to do on a separate day and make separate trips. So I think finding out of when people are driving, yeah, technically I'm driving to work alone. However, I'm actually making most of that time to be my most productive. I think that would be an important thing that we ask as a follow-up question, because even though they're driving alone, maybe they're actually being more productive and they're actually saving VMT. And then the other thing would be, again, I kind of brought this up on online shopping. How do we figure out what that number is as far as when people are online shopping? Because like during the pandemic, we did it all the time out of necessity, probably more than anything. And the tracking of the greenhouse gases on that versus if we're actually in our car and driving and running those errands. I think those two things would probably, you know, affect our numbers greatly, depending on what those answers are. So I feel like if we had follow-up questions, that would be, you know, like okay, if they say this, then we ask this. I think that would be very helpful in getting real data that really tracks what's happening and on the ground right now today.
Oh, thank you. It's great to have your input on that, because we are thinking about doing the survey again to see how, again, it's going to change in a couple of years. When we come to talk to you about initial networks, I'll be talking about some of the data we collected. And just so you know, we do a household travel behavior survey that looks at trips and tours and how people are combining. And that is data that goes into our transportation model. So we can talk with you more about that. And then we also do a commercial vehicle survey, which again is looking at the types of trucks and travel and number of miles there. And again, that goes into the model. So we'll definitely talk to you more about that, but I'll make a note of this to share with staff for other questions to add.
Yeah, like for UPS, for instance, I have a UPS in San Marcos. Like we have a UPS, like first thing in the morning, all you're seeing is trucks after trucks jumping on the freeway. There's a lot of them, and we do know that. But I think just, you know, I just appreciate your time and considering some of the things that I think many of us probably see in our cities, just to throw in for feedback so that we can get the best data possible.
Ms. Dillard, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Burke, for your report. It was very informative. I would just like to follow up what the mayor was talking about as far as follow-up questions. I know that there's been information that I've read about in regards to some of the corporations and small businesses that you may have been talking to about the hybrid situation, or whether they went back to 100%, you know, working in an office. And some of the statistics show that a person who is more present in the office has the tendency to get promoted, being noticed for their work, et cetera. So I'd like to see some follow-up questions regarding companies that are actually paying attention to that, and if they have done any surveys or questioned their employees about how they feel in regards to that, and and how the corporations or businesses feel about it themselves, to determine whether that's a factor at all, because some people just kind of implement something and they don't know what the heartbeat is of their employees. And the other side of that is that I've read about employees that are basically bothered by the fact that they did have 100% or pretty much so during the pandemic, and that organizations, including educational organizations, have forced people to come back, and they'll either opt for a hybrid situation, but they'll limit the days. In other words, some people will have to come in 2 days a week, whereas others will have to come in 3 or 4 days a week. They're only getting 1 day a week, something like that. And they're actually expressing unhappiness with the fact that they haven't inquired and spoken to employees about how they feel about, the hybrid situation, if that's the case, and what do they prefer? Because really, you want people to be happy as an employee. And what I've also observed is, for instance, in the educational department or field, is that people are quitting. People are quitting, moving to other types of jobs that offer what they are looking for. So I would like to see some follow-up with that. In other words, if an employer says this, then we're following up and saying, well, have you surveyed your employees? Do you know how they feel about this or that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from members? Seeing none, Dr. Burke, thank you so much for your report and for this information. Thank you. Next up in our agenda is the Regional Resilience Framework Project by Mr. Jeff Hoyos. He is going to present an overview of the Regional Resilience Framework Project. Mr. Hoyos.
Thank you. Good afternoon, folks. I'm a regional planner here in the planning department at SANDAG, and I'm happy to be here to talk about this Regional Resilience Framework. First of all, what is this thing? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? It's a resilience framework, and it's looking at adaptation planning. So adaptation planning, y'all are pretty familiar with mitigation efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And recently, acknowledging that sometimes as much mitigation as we're doing, we still need to adapt to impacts of climate change and the hazards. And so we are working on this framework, which will set up some best practices for adaptation planning, help local governments with some resources, provide some foundations for folks because as of recently, there's as you update your general plans, you have to include in your safety elements and adaptation elements and considerations there. So we want to provide this framework to help you all with your adaptation planning efforts. And then, that all leads into resiliency. Being able to mitigate and adapt to climate impacts will lead to more resilient communities, being able to bounce back quicker from these impacts of climate change, So the framework includes an existing conditions report and an analysis. Where are we with adaptation planning? What's the status of adaptation planning? Where are we doing well? What could we do better at? And it also includes a story map, which goes through the 4 steps of adaptation planning that is set by the state of California. And we'll talk about that in a second here. And then based on the input that we got from our practitioners, the local government staff that we all worked with, we developed some resilience tools to help you all develop and implement some adaptation efforts. So this is a little bit about what we've heard from you all, where we are in the region. The California Adaptation Planning Guide defines 4 phases. We have explore, define, and initiate as phase 1. Phase 2 is assess vulnerability. Phase 3 is adaptation framework and strategy. So how are you going to adapt to the climate impacts? And then phase 4 is actually implementing and addressing, starting to implement, evaluate, and adjust. It's an iterative cycle. So you get to phase 4 and you start all over again, and you can see how well did we do? What do we need to do better next time? How do we assess that vulnerability? How can we do better the next time? And it's a circular cycle, We found that in the region, the local governments are doing pretty well at phases 1 and 3, but then they need some help with phases 2 and 4. So assessing vulnerability is mostly a staff capacity issue. It's hard to assess every single vulnerability to hazards in the region. And then phase 4 is implementing monitoring and adjusting. This is relatively new. So a lot of folks have gotten to maybe phase 3, but haven't really had the chance to implement and start to evaluate and adjust. We also know that adaptation metrics are a little bit hard to track down because climate change impacts every jurisdiction a little bit differently. And everybody has a slightly different risk tolerance. So it's a little bit hard. There's no set adaptation metrics statewide or even region-wide. So based on the feedback we got, we worked with our project team to develop some tools that can help the sustainability staff implement and develop adaptation efforts here in the region. So those tools, we have 3 major tools here. One's an adaptation pathways tool, an adaptation metrics development tool and guide, and then a pre-project planning checklist. All 3 of these tools are accompanied with a guide that talks a little bit more about each tool, how they can be used. But briefly here, I'll talk to you about all 3, and then the tools and the guide and the framework itself will be coming out next week for input in the month of December. So the pathways. Climate change impacts are tricky. We don't know exactly when they're going to hit and how they're going to hit and how hard they're going to affect folks. And so rather than doing a time-based approach, adaptation pathways look at thresholds or triggers. So based on X many extreme heat days, or this much fire, or this much sea level rise / flooding, that can trigger either feasibility studies or actual implementation of nature-based or climate solutions, maybe more traditional civil engineering solutions. And so this adaptation pathways mechanism or tool can help a local government plan for adaptation efforts and how to address climate impacts, rather than guessing and saying, by 2100, we're going to have to do this. We don't quite know. So these adaptation pathways allow you to have some flexibility. It provides you with a plan to address these impacts. And then based on actual observed events, you are able to then make actions and spend your money wisely. Adaptation metrics, as I mentioned, are a little bit more tricky to measure. And so this tool really helps you define your adaptation metrics. How do I want to define this? How am I thinking about equity within this? And really, what are the ways that we can track this so that over time we can evaluate how well our adaptation pathways and our overall plans are working? The pre-project planning checklist is more of like a California Environmental Quality Act checklist, where at the beginning of a project, you look at your project and you say, what do I anticipate my project facing as far as climate impacts? Is it going to be extreme heat? Is it going to be sea level rise? Will it be maybe wildfire? And then based on that, you take your project and you run it through a series of checks. If it's going to be in a sea level rise area, is my project, planning for that? And if so, how is it doing that? So that you are not thinking about it once the project is complete and you're like, oh shoot, we got to go back and fix this or add these additional steps here. So those tools accompany the framework along with a guidebook, as I mentioned, and we finalized the tools this fall, and both the framework and the tools will be released next week for feedback and input. We're looking forward to getting y'all feedback, and we'll take that input and comment, and we'll wrap it into our final framework, which will be available in January. Excuse me. Thank you. And feel free to email me all your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyos. Where am I? Ms. Francesca, any public comment, ma'am?
Thank you, Chair. We do have one public comment, the original draw. You can go ahead.
Man, I feel sorry for you guys doing this work. But I mean, you're getting paid to do it, so whatever. And you're right, you're never going to know, any kind of dates. As you can see, like the people that have been pushing for this or on the whole climate change and stuff like that, it's changed names along the way. But I mean, for years, they would be telling us that by this time, we'd basically be, all be dead from climate change. And it keeps happening. It's like we keep trying to push people into this fear-based state that if we don't do this, we're all going to die. Like the heat is going to get so bad and the fires and the sea level is going to rise. And we're just like, what are we going to do? Right. And we have to mitigate that. And we act like we can. And we know we can't. That's the thing. It's like there's no way you could ever plan to do something. And you know, what I look forward to is the day when you do all these things and then you do your testing, which actually probably would never happen because you're always going to have people that are going to be collecting the data that are going to skew it to make sure it looks like what you're doing is good. But I guarantee you, none of the things that you're doing, and you know it probably, that it's going to make any kind of impact on the climate. I mean, because we have people that think that spraying chemtrails and heavy metals and even like, you know, human DNA and different things in the air is to help the climate. Yet we don't ever want to acknowledge that that's some of the stuff that you're probably testing in the air. And if you were to test, you know, different plants and different things, you would see that there's nanoparticulate matter that is very, very small. So it's highly flammable. That would also inflame a fire if there was one. So it's going to make everything burn even more. You know, but we do things that actually go against like any kind of health or safety or anything like that that would be good for even a human being, and act like spraying heavy metals and stuff like that is going to, you know, help the planet. I mean, we have, you know, like projects that people are going into pretend space, which isn't even there. And what about that? Are we going to like mitigate them, like, you know, causing the air to be so bad? Or is that something that like we need it because we got to collect data in space and we got to see if we can go to Mars while the planet spins around 1,000 miles an hour? It's crazy. But it's just, it's funny the way that we talk about this. And, you know, as long as you seem like you're doing a bunch of busy work to do what needs to be done, you're never really going to look at the issue and what's really going on, and the fact that this has nothing to do again with to save the planet. And you'll never be able to. It's not in your capacity. And to think that you can is just, it's crazy to think that you guys feel like you have all this power in your hands and you're like, I'm just going to like wave my wand and everything is going to get better. Not at all. And it's sad because it's only enslaving us.
Thank you. Any member comments? Yes, Ms. Light.
Thank you, Jeff. I like this report. I like the way that it's going, this draft report. One thing I like to do, and what I feel as though the consultant has helped articulate here, is that climate change and adaptation and resilience those are kind of new things that we have not wrapped our heads around as municipalities in the past. But I like to think of it, well, this is kind of like any other resource we have in our community. And I'm going to just do pavement because we always talk a lot about pavement in our city in Encinitas, and I think all cities do. So we have a pavement preservation index. We know that pavement is something that's important to our community. And so we install pavement and then we evaluate it. And through our PPI, our pavement preservation index, we look to see when we have to address managing it and improving it so that we can continue to provide the quality of life that our residents want. Sometimes when you have new things like adaptation and resilience, it's kind of like, it's so much that it's hard for people to understand. How do I assess that in my community? How do I even measure it? What is it and what do I measure? I mean, there's so many questions around it. So the more that SANDAG can communicate about this and the more that you can help each of our municipalities understand, even if it's just baby steps and small moves in this direction, understanding where we're at, what our resources are, how to evaluate them. What I like about this framework is that it takes something that's pretty broad and not well understood and tries to articulate it in a way that many people could understand. And sometimes when you do that, and you kind of create numerical values like we are in this case, it really does help further the understanding across the broader community. So I wanted to kind of shed a light on how I think the resilience tool could be very helpful. I do want to ask a couple questions. One of the things I saw in the resilience tool, and please clarify this if I'm getting it wrong, is one of the metrics, and I think it was under economic, had to do with whether there's a policy already in place that could help address what's been identified as an issue. I think that's a good thing to understand. But I wonder if that should be kept separate in that, yes, we understand there might not be a policy in place yet, but that shouldn't be seen as a negative. It should be a call to action to evaluate the other components in that metric to determine whether that rises to the level that it does need a policy to wrap around it to improve, to address the concern. So honestly, it's my belief that we may not have policies in place that might be important to move the dial. And so we may encounter that when we try to apply this rubric, and I wouldn't want that to be a negative. I think it's an awareness thing that should generate a call to action to evaluate a policy that would be needed. Am I understanding how that rubric is used correctly?
I think, I agree with you, what you're saying. And the idea is that you are calling attention to whether or not there's a policy or not. And it might help you prioritize whether or not there needs to be a policy around it. And if there is a policy already around it, what can you learn from it? What has been done and how is it working? So you can kind of go back to the, as I said, evaluation part of it. So it's a combination of, calling attention to whether or not there's policies and maybe there needs to be a policy developed to address a certain element, or maybe there already is. And then is there any tracking? Can you go back, can you look and see how it's actually being implemented? And if not, maybe you need to start doing some evaluation around that, monitoring and evaluation.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it spins off into its own little analysis or important analysis, not little, but important. Thank you. Another question is, I'm really interested to see how SANDAG can help. When you identified staff resources as an issue that the municipalities might have, I say yes, but it's so important. So it's one thing to put the resources into creating a strong framework, but if it's not implementable because we don't have the resources, then it's useless. I don't want to use such strong words, but I'm just saying it's a real thing that cities don't have the resources to add new and important things to their list of needs and things that we do. And so any further, maybe as you go along, any further feedback you can give as this is rolled out to how SANDAG is able to, or not able to, but the reality needs to be addressed about resources to assist. And just one more question is it identified anywhere that a city should, of course, do an initial analysis, but then on an annual basis, do analysis on a 5-year basis? Is there something about how this needs to be part of the protocols that cities need to integrate?
I have to cheat and use some notes here real quick, but the answer is yes. So the general plan requirements based on SB 379 and SB 1035 require a safety element to include adaptation in their general plan. When you update your general plan, you now have to include in your safety element adaptation considerations. And there's 3 main things you need to do. You need to do a vulnerability assessment. You need to set goals, policies, and objectives based on that vulnerability assessment to protect the community. And then a set of feasibility and implementation strategies that you can carry out with goals to carry out the goals, policies, and objectives, excuse me. So that's part of, there's no set currently adaptation plan required, but there is within your safety element as you do general plan updates, a requirement to include adaptation considerations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoyos. Thank you. National City is doing its final general plan update, and this climate action plan is a huge part of it. I sure hope that our director, Carlos Aguirre, is working with your team to be educated also in this framework. Thank you. Thank you. Next agenda item is Ms. Paula Zamudio will provide an overview of the SANDAG Tribal Program and consultation efforts.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. I know we're running into time here, so we will get started. I'm Paula Zamudio. I'm the tribal liaison here at SANDAG. Happy to bring an update on our tribal program. I'm very pleased to be joined by the Manzanita Band of Kumeyaay Nation Tribal Chairwoman, Angela Elliott Santos. She is going to start our presentation today, share a little bit about tribal nations in our region. Let me get, there we go.
Good afternoon. Hauka. My name is Angela Elliott Santos. I'm the tribal chairwoman for the Manzanita Band of the Kumeyaay Nation. We're a non-gaming tribe located in the southeast San Diego County in Supervisor Anderson's district. Our reservation was established in 1891 by executive order. Our region is home to 18 Native American reservations represented by 17 tribal governments, the most in any county in the United States. Tribal reservations are represented by the multicolored boundaries on this map. As you can see, I believe all are within the unincorporated portions of the county. The four cultural linguistic groups are the Luiseno, I think they're also known as the Pyokowichum, I think I got that word right, who traditionally inhabited the land along the San Luis Rey River in the north and northwestern San Diego, the Cahuilla, who live in the mountains in the northeastern part of the county, and into Coachella and the Imperial Valleys. The Cupeño, who live in the Warner Springs area, and the Kumeyaay. The northern Kumeyaay are known as Ipai, the southern Kumeyaay are known as Tipai, who live in the southern part of the county from the coast to the mountains and into the deserts of Imperial Valley and all the way into what is today Baja California. I can speak specifically about well, I guess before I go on, I do want to say one thing with this map and the way the boundaries are. And so you see the individual reservations and where they are in these pieces of land that are probably not the best pieces of land that we could have gotten. But I want to stress to us, because we're here at this regional planning level, that all of the land that is colored is so important to all of the groups that we just described. Although we have been moved to these reservations that are rural, we still visit all of our sacred places. The land is still important to us. We still gather, we still live in harmony with those lands. So I want to speak a little bit about Manzanita because that's where I'm from. I have been on the tribal council for the last 25 years, the last 8 of them serving as the chairwoman. Let's see. I do want to let everyone know that it has been proven by science that our people have been in this region for over 10,000 years. I do like to talk specifically about a spot in Jacumba near the hot spring. Well, it's not right near the hot springs, but there's a spot in Jacumba that was, once it was developed, the science proved that they found our artifacts as far as 25 feet below the ground, and all their testing did prove that that site was over 10,000 years old. So it's also known as one of the most continuously inhabited sites in this country, since we live just 15 minutes from that area. 4 tribes live right in that area. So I guess what I want to also say to you is that as this agency moves to bridge the gaps of inequality, ensuring that the voices and needs of tribal community, we'd like to ensure that the voices of the tribal communities are heard. It's been a long time coming that we get to have a seat at the table, and I realize it's at an advisory capacity, and I hope someday that changes to where the tribes actually have some input. I would like to stress that the sooner tribes have input on the development, the better that it is for everyone, and that we could work in a collaborative way to protect what's important to us and to also be good neighbors. So Like all of you here who represent your constituents and fight to ensure their needs are met, create economic development opportunities, and work to ensure your districts and cities gain greater access, we are really doing the same. It is important that you as the leaders know who we are in our history and know no, we are not all the same. I do want to say that does present, you know, when I was reading about SANDAG on the website and it talked about how many communities that it represented, I feel like when you add the tribal governments, that's 18 more communities. And it should be said because each and every one of those tribal governments is its own independent sovereign nation with its own laws, its own elected government. And each tribe deserves that individuality and to be respected and looked at just like any other municipality, but we're actually a sovereign nation within this state. So I do want to stress those things. And we don't all have the same resources, which is why I guess I started off with, no, we're not from a gaming tribe. And what I also should have started off with was, I apologize for being so late. I do have to drive 50 miles to get here. And the checkpoint on the 8 had been closed like for the last 2 months. So I didn't allow extra time. And this time they were talking to every single person. And I was like, no. So, but we certainly want to be included as intentional partners in the future of this region as tribal nations. And so thank you so much for this time and allowing us to have a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman Elliot Santos. I just want you to know that before we start this commission, we start with an acknowledgement of the Kumeyaay people that has been a part of this land. So just would like you to know that. Thank you.
Thank you. And we definitely appreciate that. Knowledge of our people is really what is going to move forward the healing process. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any member of public, any member, oh no, any member comments?
Vice Chair? I actually have a few more slides. I'm happy to rush through them so we have time.
Sorry, Ms. Amudio.
No problem, no problem at all. And I will take a moment to say, even though it's December 1st, to share if folks did not know that November was Native American Heritage Month. So just a good opportunity to recognize the legacy of Indigenous folks in our land that they've had and continue to have, you know, in our communities, society, culture, all around. So I will try to be very quick. You can see on this slide the various elements of our tribal consultation plan. SANDAG has a long history of working closely with tribal nations. We have a formalized government to government structure. There was an MOU signed in 2007. It established advisory roles for tribal members on our board of directors, as well as our committees, including this one. This type of arrangement is uncommon at the local or even regional level. It's typically been applied at the state or federal level. So that is something I think that we are proud of here at SANDAG. As part of each regional plan cycle, we do put together this tribal consultation plan. We work closely with the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. The plan really just details the priorities and outlines how we're going to work together. Once we put together this plan, we have ongoing collaboration through a variety of different meetings. The Interagency Technical Working Group on Tribal Transportation Issues, that's a mouthful. That's a group that's been meeting regularly since 2006. It's composed of tribal leaders, obviously SANDAG staff, Caltrans, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the County of San Diego, and our transit operators also participate in the working group. These quarterly meetings really provide an opportunity to, of course, consult on the regional plan, but also discuss transportation issues that are relevant and specific to tribes. We have a tribal task force. That's a monthly meeting. Participants tend to be tribal members who work or staff who work in planning, as well as representatives from all the agencies that sit on the working group. And then you can see here Tribal Summit, Tribal Symposium. The first Tribal Summit was held in 2002, so well before we formalized our framework with tribes. That's our board of directors and tribal leaders, really an opportunity for leaders to talk and discuss policy areas of mutual concern. The Tribal Symposium let me back up a second. So the Tribal Summit is typically held every 4 years. Tribal Symposium, another opportunity for collaboration. This is a joint meeting between the working group and our Borders Committee. And again, just provides continued opportunities for continued collaboration. Both of these events were interrupted because of the pandemic. We were able to host the first symposium since 2019, a couple weeks ago, November 15th, here in our boardroom. You see that's a photo from that event, and we are planning towards a tribal summit in 2024. So we're happy to be able to convene these meetings again. And then I will quickly go through these. This is just an example or some examples of some of the collaborative efforts that we're working on with tribes. The first one you see is the Inter-Regional Tribal Transportation Strategy, really just putting together all tribal transportation needs into one place. It's more than 200 projects. Was first completed in 2018, updated in 2021. It's really used to inform our planning efforts, including, of course, the regional plan, as well as our comprehensive multimodal corridor plans. A big effort that came out of that were 2 early action projects that were identified. Those were improvements to State Route 76 from Rice Canyon Road to Paula Reservation, as well as interchange improvements at Interstate 8 and West Willows Road. So dedicating funds and attention to those projects that were tribal priorities. We're working closely with Caltrans on these to move them forward to the next stages of design and environmental assessment. Next on that list, you see REAP 2.0. REAP stands for Regional Early Action Planning Grants. You may know that. SANDAG is contributing $2 million of the funds that we received from the state's REAP 2.0 grant. We're contributing this to the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association in order to help advance their housing needs on or near tribal reservations. Funds will be available to tribes in 2024. And then third on this, it's the LATA, short for Local Agency Technical Assistance. This is a grant that SANDAG applied to jointly with the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. We were awarded nearly $500,000. Those funds are going to be used to improve internet connectivity for the Tribal Digital Village, which is a tribal-led internet network that serves more than 100 tribal buildings and up to 500 tribal households. The project's going to include an internet connectivity plan and implementation strategy for high-quality internet service to tribal lands. And third, last on there, you see Vision Zero. Staff is working with the La Jolla Band of Luiseño Indians on their Safe Streets and Roads for All Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. This is happening in tandem with our agency's regional Vision Zero action plan. So SANDAG's action plan is going to make any project identified within a tribal area eligible for implementation competitive grant funds. And then the La Jolla Band of Luiseño Indians plan is going to allow for a much more thorough analysis, and their efforts will also result in a template that other tribes can use for their safety action plan. And then I did just want to mention, it's not on here, but just this week, we submitted a Department of Transportation application for a Thriving Communities Regional Pilot Program grant. If we are awarded, that would be $2 million in technical assistance, planning, and capacity building support for tribes in our region. So again, just a sample of some of the efforts we're working on with tribes. It's a lot. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to turn it back to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Any public comment, Ms. Francesca?
Thank you, Chair. We do have one public comment. The original draw, you can go ahead.
I appreciate the speaker before the presentation. I'm not sure of your name and I apologize, but it's just sad to hear you talk about, how much, land has been taken and what kind of ability to put in input you have into this board or anything going on around you. And, I'm a Native American. And so, my family, I just have feelings about this because of that. And, you talk about being sovereign, but in reality, whenever we engage with the government that has already taken your land and put you in a rural area, basically, which is also places that they don't want people to be. So I'm wondering what's going to happen when they're trying to get everybody out of these rural areas and into densely populated areas. Are they going to leave you alone? And you got into an MOU in 2007 just to have an advisory role. And you should have input, and there should be possibly 18 more other positions on this board to get input from every community in this county, but you're not. And, it's like, you want to talk about, I don't know, it's just, so I wonder what you think about Palestine and Israel, because most of these people think Israel should be taking that land, which, it's very sad. But what is happening is, and what they're making you engage in with the whole climate stuff is actually not good for the land. And the land is supposedly the most important thing. It's like you would rather have that than money, because it's actually something that you can pass on, and that, money could burn and whatever, or you could lose it. But, when we give them an inch, they take a mile. And I just feel like they're barely giving you a seat to put in any kind of, input into your own communities, even though you have your reservations and whatnot. But, if they're saying that they want to be equitable and everything, I don't know why you wouldn't have any kind of position on the board, at least one, or, if not 18, because there's 18 different tribes. But when we're talking about like the internet and stuff like that, I mean, that's EMF radiation comes from that. I don't know if you guys look into that and if you're really understanding what they're talking about with the climate, but all of the Vision Zero stuff is actually not good for the climate. And Hakamba is set, if not already has a solar field that's taking up all their land. And it's like displacing a bunch of species. So it's like they'll do it on one hand for certain things if they have to get this project forward, but then on the other hand, they'll act like they want to sit and preserve things. But you need to know who you're getting in bed with. And, the more that you engage with them and let them come onto your land and do different things, you should be doing an MOU that says that you guarantee that you keep your sovereignty 100% no matter what.
Any member comments? With that, our next Regional Planning Committee meeting is scheduled for Friday, January 5th, 2024 at 1 p.m. Happy holidays to all. Be safe, be kind. Thank you.